Good morning, and welcome back to Free Read Fridays. I'm your intrepid narrator, Fraggeth, and today I've got more Destination Void by Frank Herbert. So previously on our plucky band of clones, Flattery, Timberlake, Bickel, and whatever Prue's last name is. I think they just call her Prudence. Yeah, they keep calling her Prue and Prudence. Not her last name. I don't know what her last name is right off the top of my head. Sorry. At any rate, um, Bickel and Timberlake have begun construction of what is called an aux unit, spelled OX, as opposed to AUX. And my understanding is that it's basically intended to be kind of a proof of concept that they can set up a neural network of some kind. And that the principles that Bickel has espoused can in fact be used to at least have a functioning computer. Whether it'll be conscious remains to be seen. However, upon completion of cobbling most of the basics of this thing together, they try to do the local equivalent of a hello world command, and nothing. They get nothing. Nothing happens. So they, which it should have done. It should have worked. But it just probably means, if they're lucky, that nothing. So they messed up wiring or something somewhere. They misplaced a circuit or something, and they'll just have to go through and check it off. Unfortunately, or rather, fortunately, it's not hooked into anything on the ship. So it can't cause problems. However, that conclusion, rather, is based on the assumption that the ship is wired the way their schematics that they learned on is accurate. And unfortunately, none of this has been according to plan, at least the plan that they've been told. So, odds are, it is not wired the way it's supposed to be. I think that's about it. Oh, hello, Derpy Shark. Sorry, I didn't see your message earlier. Hello, good morning, and total goat infestation factor. Okay. Yeah, that basically catches us. This isn't going to presage something flummoxing. Uh, that pretty much catches us up. We are actually flying through this right now. We're up to our third installment. We're going to be basically at the halfway point at the end of this, give or take. How many pages is that? Yeah, that's about right. That's about right. Yeah, yeah, yeah. Okay, so I'm gonna get cracking and sit back, relax, and hopefully your hibernation tank keeps on working. Chapter 15. Computers are just systems with a great amount of unconsciousness, everything held in immediate memory and subject to programs which the operator initiates. The operator, therefore, is the consciousness of the computer. Raja Lawn Flattery, The Book of Ship. It was at least 5 minutes before Timberlake returned with Bickel. While she waited, Prudence ran through the experiment a second and a third time. Both tests produced the truncated readout. She felt a constricting sensation in her chest. Every sound in the room pressed in on her. Each tiny metallic click, the low humming of a timer, the faint breathing of a ventilator. She felt that this thing in front of her was something profoundly dangerous. It required her to act with delicate care. Something new had come awake on the Earthling. The hatch slammed open behind her. Bickel pushed her aside, bent over the terminal. "Let me see." His fingers flew over the keys. He scanned the readout. "My God, it is!" Timberlake moved up behind him, peered over Bickel's shoulder. "How?" Timberlake asked. "Tim," Bickel directed, "take the panel off that storage bank. Check it with everything we have. There has to be a line from it into the main computer somehow, a line that doesn't show on the master plan." "But why would this thing start feeding us the right answer now?" Prudence demanded. "That?" Bickel dismissed it with a wave of the hand. "The program went in with a key showing what was expected. Every part of the program was worked out on the main computer. We never cleared our work. It's still in there, acting as a filter. It filtered out everything except the answer that was keyed for optimum. Hell, anybody can make a computer act like that kind of filter. It doesn't mean a thing." "Not so fast," she said, excited by a sudden inspiration. "What do you really have over there in that test setup?" She looked at the construction which Bickel so irreverently referred to as the aux. It still stood there like a surrealistic extrusion from the flat expanse of panel. "You call it a transducer of sorts," she said. "What's that really mean? The thing you have there is composed of blocks of nerve net simulators arranged to integrate 3 lines of energy. The operational term is nerve net simulators." "She gets too excited and she talks too much," Bickel thought. He knew this was partly his fatigue thinking for him, but he felt keyed up, buoyed by the quick discovery of what had gone wrong. He wanted to cut the link with the computer and rerun the test. Timberlake already was removing the panel to get at the storage bank. The panel cover grated on the deck as he pushed it aside. "Yeah, nerve net simulators," Bickel said. He kept his attention on Timberlake, admiring the direct, purposeful way the man went at it. Timberlake was good at this work. Prudence misread Bickel's answer, said, "And what's a nerve net but an embedding space? It catches energy the way a spider web might catch ink you threw at it. The net makes a record in 4 dimensions of the energy you throw at it." "Nice analogy," Bickel said. "You finding anything, Tim?" "Not yet," Timberlake said. He was on his back now, his head, arms, and shoulders into the crawl space beneath the first wiring layer of the panel-to-storage system. Noting where Timberlake had concentrated his attention, Bickel said, "I think you're right, Tim. It's most likely to be down there with the primary sheaths." Prudence, concentrating on following her own train of thought, said, "So we have multiple embedding space, an energy catcher in 4 dimensions. The test program passes through this space as flux impulses in 4 dimensions and filters past the inhibitory roulette cycles in—" "How's that again?" Bickel interrupted. She looked up to find him staring at her. "How's what again?" she asked.
"That about flux impulses."
"I said the test program passes through the embedding space as flux impulses in 4 dimensions and filters past the inhibitory roulette."
"By God, you're right," Bickel said. "The roulette cycles would be a filter. I never thought of it that way. You'd get a pileup of nodal pulses at random points in the net layers. Your test program would have to find its own path through that, canceling out at some points, but passing on wherever it had a slightly higher potential."
"And this filter screens the program through a system of random errors,"
Prudence said. So you have to be wrong about the way it produced your truncated answers. The program that got through to the computer couldn't have been anything at all like what you previously punched into the banks, yet it produced the right answers. Let's play this over slowly, Bickel said. We have circuitry here, the aux plus computer, that should connect point events in space-time, right? Right. That's your embedding space in 4 dimensions. Embedding, by the way, is I-M-B-E-D-D-I-N-G, not M-bedding. It's probably not going to come through super well.
My nasal passage is slightly clogged, and it's not an expensive microphone. Sorry. Maybe later.
Right. Right. That's your embedding space in 4 dimensions. So we sent energy pulses through it, and those... Yo! Timberlake called, his voice echoing with a hollow resonance from the crawl space. Bickel looked down, saw that only Timberlake's feet protruded into the shop now. Found it, Timberlake said. It's a 50-line sheaf, single plug. Shall I pull it? Where does it lead? Bickel asked. According to the color code, it leads right down into the accessory storage banks, Timberlake said. His feet disappeared into the crawl space. All these banks are linked that way. Why the hell doesn't it appear on the schematics? Bickel got down on his hands and knees at the mouth of the crawl hole. Is there any kind of buffer or gating system in those lines? A hand light wavered back and forth in the crawl space. Yeah, by God, Timberlake said. How'd you know? Had to be, Bickel said. That's a computer failsafe system. And something else. Don't mess with it. Why? What do you mean? Prudence asked. It's a recording system, Bickel said. And he had his answer to an earlier question. Would Moonbase install hidden elements in the ship plus computer system? Yes, and here was one of those hidden elements. Recording? Prudence was puzzled. Yes, he was angry. Everything the computer does, everything we do, all recorded. Why? So they can recover it and analyze it even if we're not around to help. But why wouldn't they tell us about? They didn't want us questioning the purpose of this voyage until it was too late for us to change course. She was defensive. We could still go back to... Don't be dense, Prue. A one-way trip. They don't want us back. We could be very dangerous. The only useful thing we have to offer is information. Discovery. Bickel rocked back on his heels, fighting a lost, sinking sensation. Those bastards, he thought. They knew we'd find this the first time we went looking into the computer's innards. They've tied our hands. Timberlake came scooting out of the crawl space, stood up. There's a cover plate down there with a red letter warning. Extreme danger. To be opened by Moonbase personnel only. Does that make sense to you? I wish it didn't, Bickel said. He peered into the hole. Timberlake was as puzzled as Prudence had been. But a recorder and failsafe system with such... That has "Don't Touch" written all over it, Bickel said. I guarantee you, mess with it and something really destructive happens. Don't touch a damn thing. He stood up, removed the blocking plugs they had installed to isolate their test system. His movements were wooden and poorly coordinated. Isolate. He pushed past Prudence, who still appeared puzzled. Oh man, there's some interesting alliteration occurring there, whether deliberately or otherwise. He pushed past Prudence, who still appeared puzzled. There we go. Did any of the others understand what was really happening here? The test leads clattered as he threw them onto the bench. All he'd done with his experiment was change the potential at one point and ensure that they would not have the addresses on any of the test information they had just sent into the total computer system. Timberlake followed him to the bench. But what about those results, the truncated... Use your head, Bickel whirled on him. This computer has a random access system as far as we're concerned. Enormous blocks of information filed in it bit by bit in such a way that only the total computer can reproduce it for us. That's why we have so many special function routines and subroutines and sub-subroutines ad infinitum. The addresses of those we know. But the failsafe, the warning, that's a special kind of message to us, Bickel said.
Prudence knew she had to head him away from this conjecture. She spoke quickly.
The organic cores must have known where their information was. And they're dead, Bickel said. Get the message?
Wait a minute, Timberlake said. Are you trying to tell us?
The computer is what keeps us alive, Bickel said. That's all that keeps us alive. We win or lose with that computer.
Timberlake turned to stare at the open access panel.
But
he broke off. Prudence, seeing what Timberlake had just realized, felt her mouth go dry. Some of the information in this monster would be filed many times, depending on the power with which it had been inserted. Some information was filed just once and could be lost through the kick of a proton. And that total system controlled their destiny.
This computer's storage banks amount to one enormous internally balanced system, Bickel said.
Prudence nodded. It was like a superb human memory in some respects, even worked something like a human memory, but it was a fine instrument with all the delicate weaknesses implied by that term.
Jesus, Timberlake whispered, and we shot an unknown program through it. Worse than that, Bickel said, because of that unrecorded tie-in to the computer.
He swallowed, wondering if they already appreciated the extent of this disaster. Turning, he indicated the piled cubes and rectangles, the sheafs of quasi-biological nerve fiber that constituted his ox. The others turned in the direction he pointed.
That setup is, in effect, an extension of the computer, Bickel said.
The error factor, Prudence said. She put a hand to her mouth.
We've introduced an error factor into the computer, Bickel said, and that means, first, that we've introduced the probability, no, the certainty, of an unknown number of subspaces within the computer's space-time. The program we've just thrown into the computer, to land we know not where, will produce unknown topological linkages, new networks all through the system.
In the memory storage banks primarily, Timberlake said.
And in the transducer nets, Bickel said.
But this storage unit here produced the circuit analysis information when I asked for it, Prudence said.
Certainly, Bickel said, but your demand amounted to a program for a subroutine. Where the information came from, God alone knows. Just in the first stage, there are 50 lines leading out of this unit, and those lines filter through a buffer system, remember? The bits go out of here, charge through that buffer system, and are split up 50 ways, according to their differences in potential. That's just the first stage. At the next stage, your division is 50 times 50, and then 50 times 50 times 50, and so on.
It was like trying to work with a memory whose only certain property was that everything stored in it was stored according to a scatter pattern and could only be recovered if you knew the pattern. Guaranteed selective amnesia, but that was kind of human. This bank here was just like a knitting machine, Prudence said. It took the threads of the record from this test setup and knitted them out through the storage banks of the entire system, smearing that record across an unknown number of retainer cells.
An unknown number of times, Bickel said. Remember that. And we only have one address for the entire record of that test, the address of a subroutine program. If that's lost, the whole record's lost, unless we manage to match enough pieces of it in another program to pull it out of the system again.
But isn't that pretty much the way human memory works?
Prudence asked. And here's another thing. It produced the right answer at the translator. The right answer.
Bickel looked at her, turning that fact over in his mind.
She was right, by God, and not for the reason he had so glibly spouted.
The thing had produced the right answers in spite of errors and misprogramming. The processing procedure stank. It was heuristic and should not, under any circumstances, have yielded the desired output. But it had. Why? Bickel experienced a mental sensation as though his mind lurched. It was so much like a physical sensation, he wondered that the others didn't notice. The beautiful clarity with which he understood what had happened in the computer washed through him like a stimulant. Didn't the others see it? He looked at Prudence, at Timberlake, realized this had all occurred in a fraction of a second. For motion produceth nothing but motion. The words rang through his mind, producing awe at the way apparently disconnected bits, a line of poetry here, a technical phrase there, could link with a simple turn of mathematics to produce a right answer in his mind. Just the way it had happened in the computer. Prudence, correctly interpreting Bickel's expression, spoke quietly. "You're on to something, John." He nodded. "Prudence, you're our mathematician. What's pi?" She stared at him, puzzled. "I'm serious," Bickel said. "The ratio of the circumference of a circle to its diameter," she said. "A rational approximation would be approximately 22/7. A closer approximation would be 355/113. For most applications, that approximation of pi would give us significant results?" Bickel asked. "You don't have to ask that. You know it would." "Okay, now tell me why you didn't answer my question by saying pie is a sweet concoction of starchy crust enclosing a filling, often of fruit." She saw his seriousness in the way he stared at her, waiting. This bore on the problem in some way. She looked at Timberlake, and he interpreted her motion as an appeal for help. "It's obvious," Timberlake said. "You set up a category first by saying you're a mathematician. Then you asked, 'What's pi?' You didn't say, 'What's a pi?'"
"Yeah," Bickel said. "You had two screening references through which to filter the question and come up with the right answer. Then, because you sensed this was a rhetorical question in some way, you didn't try to explain first that there's no rational number for pi. You just gave me the rational approximations."
"Well, I knew I didn't have to explain that to you," Prudence said.
"That was category common information," Bickel said. "All you had to do was produce the significant answer."
"Holy cow!" Timberlake exploded, seeing where Bickel was leading them.
"Holy ox, you mean," Bickel said.
Prudence whirled, pointed wildly toward the computer panel.
"But it wasn't conscious. It couldn't have been." "It wasn't conscious," Bickel agreed. "But first crack out of the box, we've produced a significant result. And it was no accident. What can we say about the results of this test? First, we can say that the computer had sufficient information to produce an accurate answer despite errors in the system. Second, we can say we've introduced a new kind of sense data into the system previously called a computer. We can go on calling this a computer, but it's a step up from computer now. It has learned how to use a new kind of sense data."
Prudence started to speak, stopped.
"Screen everything I've said here through field theory," Bickel said. He grinned at them. "Then remember that we matched 3 energy sources in the aux. The integrator there set them up to go out identically. The buffer potential of the buffer potential of this storage unit here scattered those pulses through the system. They were divided and redivided. But wherever they matched, they reinforced each other."
In itself, the original program pulse was a kind of comparator.
Timberlake said. The computer could compare for accuracy on the basis of signal strength. And the computer already knew how to compare the AAT signals for accuracy by screening them through a code-matching grid.
Which I guess implies that there's, on every one of the AAT signals that they receive from Moonbase, and presumably that they send out, that there's a checksum, basically. Some kind of a file checksum. Which makes sense, considering they're... And I think they've kind of explained how the AAT works already, but there's going to be more on it later. I don't consider this a major spoiler. The way their AAT system works, which is what they're using to receive signals from Earth, is it's basically taking a broad, a garbled message that they're receiving kind of faintly, because, you have signal degradation due to distance, and it kind of fudges together what it probably says. That's going to become important later. They've kind of implied that, but the implications of that aren't clear yet. They will be. I've kind of spoiled something, but it's not a big deal. I mean, it is, but it's not a big spoil. They'll explain it better. It doesn't matter. Sorry.
And the computer already knew how to compare the AAT signals for accuracy by screening them through a code-matching grid, Bickel said. Signal strength was merely another kind of grid. If you're not too busy congratulating yourself, Prudence said, consider how some of those rematched signals must have grown in strength. The probability is that some elements of the computer have been shocked out of... We're still running, Bickel said, but he spoke defensively, realizing that Prudence was right. There were overload fuses throughout the filter to protect components, but stray signals overriding barrier potentials could have played hob with some of the master programs. He looked at the overhead screen, which showed Flattery manning the comm central board. Flattery appeared relaxed, but watchful, his gaze traversing the big board. Damn her, he thought. Oh, damn her, he thought. One instant, everything had been rosy, full of elation that the ox had come a short step up the ladder, not into consciousness, but toward it. And all she could think to do was throw cold water on them. Bickel met Flattery's gaze in the screen. Have you been listening, Raj? I've been listening, Flattery said. Have we gone sour yet? Bickel asked. Do you really think I'm this hypothetical human fail-safe device? Flattery asked, holding his tone to a nice balance between mockery and injured innocence. He almost goes too far, Prudence thought. If he isn't underestimating Bickel, he's pressing the limits. One course is as dangerous as the other. You're the logical candidate, Bickel said, but I was asking for your comments on progress. Flattery suppressed an abrupt feeling of jealousy. Bickel, in spite of the obvious flaw, and that was a gaping thing, balanced so beautifully. Or he appeared to balance, which was much the same thing as far as this operation was concerned. Ah, progress, Flattery said. If I understand your original test correctly, the pulse-time distances didn't check out with the space distances. They weren't proportional. That's essentially it. Bickel wondered why Flattery's tone made him feel so defensive. They've averaged out to almost a zero product. The artificial nerve nets produce something vaguely equivalent to psychological space. Flattery paused, scanned the comm central board, returned his attention to the screen and Bickel. You can say that the test pulses are more or less like sense data feeding into psychological space, a region somewhat equivalent to what Prudence calls embedding space. I like her cobweb and ink analogy, but there's a big difference between physical space and psychological space. He let it hang there a long time, forcing Bickel to admit a dependency upon someone else's expertise. If you're gonna explain it, then get at it, Bickel said. There was anger in his voice. He didn't enjoy depending on Flattery. Okay,
Flattery kept his tone even and friendly. You can time a signal across physical space, repeat it, and get matched results. Any difference will have a positive relationship to a change in distance. But psychological space? Now, that's something else again. The time there could depend on mood. What's mood, John? Is it a comparison between this and previous experiences of a similar kind? Your pulse time in psychological space will meet many more variables than it does in a physical space. Are you saying we haven't analyzed our results correctly? Timberlake asked. He glared up at the screen, feeling that he and Prudence and Bickel were arrayed somehow against Flattery. You're trying to arrive at some proportional comparison between the sense world and the physical world, Flattery said, but you can't use the same rules of measurement. Each neuron in your net will introduce an element of random conduction time, and you get more randomness from the similar variation in synaptic delay time. The difference between the sense world and the physical world is the difference between time distance and space distance, and the most casual examination of your setup indicates that you'll have random time distances.
Zero by probability, Bickel said. That won't wash.
That short effect test,
Flattery said, his voice bored,
fired off impulses which weren't time regulated. You got a variety of delay times there and in your system. That could average out statistically, by probability mechanics.
Over the entire net? Bickel demanded.
Why not? The bigger the net, the more likely this is to be true. And your net here took in the entire computer.
But we got the right answer from the translator, Bickel said, his voice pouncing. Try probability on that.
I wouldn't think of it, Flattery said, no more than I'd think of coming to definite conclusions on the basis of one test run.
Bickel glared at him. Okay, we'll run it again.
No, you won't, Flattery said, not without figuring out how to isolate your aux from the computer. And before you think of taking any storage units out of the system, ask yourself which one it'll be. Will it be a unit protecting the life of someone in the hype tanks? How about a unit controlling the drive?
We can't tell one from the other without a complete block sort of the entire system, Bickel protested.
Exactly. That shouldn't take more than 8 or 9 years, with the manpower available to us. Flattery's argument was unassailable, Bickel knew. This didn't ease the anger that surged through him at the sight of the man's coldly superior attitude. Still, Bickel felt that they had approached some unspoken, elusive, and vital fact that all of them should recognize. They had approached it and wandered away.
Then we'll transmit the problem back to Moonbase and let them run it for us,
Bickel said, forgetting your analysis of why we were sent out here to solve it, Flattery said.
Ah, you're admitting we were sent out here to sink or swim.
I'm admitting nothing, but I'd suggest you come in and man the AAT. A message has been reeling in from Moonbase for the past minute. Chapter 16.
The high data rate sense perception and identification abilities of the human system mostly bypass verbal analytic awareness. We are generally conscious of a cognitive We are generally conscious of a cognitive recognition after the fact. In this way, what we understand as consciousness has to be identified as a reflexive monitoring ability with quite limited application. To produce consciousness, artificial or otherwise, we are stepping down, not up.
John Lon Bickel, number 5, message capsule datum. Which is pretty much the conclusion drawn in Blindsight. Morgan Hempstead's burst depersonalized voice filled the control room as Bickel started the playback of the new message from Moonbase.
Calling UMB ship Earthling. This is Project calling UMB ship Earthling.
A long rolling silence followed, and they grew aware of the hissing of the tape as it sped across its sorting heads. To Prudence, that hiss was something primordial and perilous. It was a noise from the slime of evolution, and she felt that some dangerous part of her own brain came awake at hearing it.
That's foolish, she told herself. I'm reacting to my last injection.
That had to be it. The chemical experiments on her own flesh were creating imbalances. She was using a series of variations on, oh my God, tetrahydrocannabinol. Yes! She was using a series of variations on tetrahydrocan... Damn it. She was using a series of variations on tetrahydrocannabinol now, shifting the CH3 forms and adding oxygen. That was just the hissing of tapes, she reminded herself, but her head wanted to move from side to side. Something within her was fascinated by that sound. Bickel glanced around the room, Flattery at the big board yet, composed and so serenely sure of himself, Prudence in her action couch and with her eyes intent on the vocal translator at the AAT, Timberlake in his couch, eyes closed, breathing deeply. One might almost think he was asleep, but for the pulse at his temple. Bickel recognized that mannerism of Timberlake's. It meant the man was chewing over a heavy problem.
Hit it,
Hempstead said.
That must be an error, Bickel said. The AAT goofed on that one.
We do worse ourselves sometimes, Flattery said.
On the question of defining consciousness, Hempstead said, reference is made to nerve barrier and threshold data, your computer. Best dive to date.
Best definition to date, Flattery said. That's what he must have said.
New organic mental core, Hempstead said. Medical personnel are directed to abandon all such repeats in their waste of order.
There's something wrong with the AAT, Prudence said.
Not with the AAT, Bickel said, with the translator circuits from the computer. That goddamn wild program we flushed through the system like a high colonic.
Timberlake growled. He opened his eyes and stared accusingly at Bickel.
Abandon all such attempts, Hempstead said. Repeat, abandon all such attempts. This is a direct order.
That sounds like him rightly enough, Prudence said.
Under no circumstances are you to attempt to make inanimate components, Hempstead said.
Try that one on your violin, Timberlake said.
Analyze course and reaction data related to mass changes, Hempstead said. Unknown area derived mathematically.
Hash, Timberlake snarled. Garbage.
Project over and out, Hempstead said. Acknowledge year compliance.
Timberlake sat up, swung his feet to the deck. Go ahead, Bick, he said. Acknowledge year compliance. Flattery glanced at Timberlake, returned his attention to the board. Timberlake obviously was making a bid to regain his authority. That could have been predicted. Their first setback would bring him charging out, from fear for all those lives dependent on the life systems, if not for any other reason. Flattery had watched the way Timberlake studied the life systems repeaters. Nothing wrong there. Yet. But a threat to any part of the ship was a threat to all.
Was he asking us to install a new brain? Prudence asked.
Where could we get one? Timberlake asked.
We've already been through that, she said, looking at each of them in turn.
And for the first time since taking her position with the umbilicus crew, Prudence allowed herself to wonder what it really would be like to become that fleshless embodiment, the mentality which was central to a driving behemoth such as this ship. She shivered. They taunt me with blasphemy, Flattery thought. Are you cold, Prudence? He asked.
He watches me all the time, she thought. The medical part of her faced the feminine part then. I'm quite comfortable, she said. But she wasn't comfortable. Moods of depression and elation shot through her without warning and had to be concealed. Strange psychic aches tortured her mind. Fantasies of godlike power competed with the urge for physical abasement. She suspected that she was close to finding the selective stimulator of consciousness. Some of the combinations she was now using on herself provided enormous amounts of oxygen to the brain in abrupt bursts. There seemed to be a threshold effect involving the blood-brain barrier. The experiments produced residual effects, though. One of their byproducts had forced her to complete abandonment of anti-S and its body chemistry balance substitutes. Lately, she'd had to mask and suppress acute withdrawal symptoms. And she had found herself unable to deny the profound, compulsive hungers for foods heavy in B-complex vitamins. She also found herself plagued by sexual dream fantasies involving all of her companions. Bickel turned from the AAT with a length of printer tape, said, "Garbage."
What else?
Timberlake snapped. Flattery started to speak, froze in the act while he studied the track graph on his board. He hadn't imagined it. The graph was climbing. We've been gaining speed for several minutes. Slow, but steady.
Drive problems now.
Timberlake snarled. Flattery activated the drive readout, scanned it. No emission. GR level shows the normal radiation drop.
Mass register?
Bickel asked. Flattery's hands flicked over the keyboard. He scanned his gauges. Out of register. Mass reference is out of register.
What are your readings?
Bickel said. They vary through 10 Argos, Flattery muttered. They don't graph back. No series constant in the curve of change. Mass is out of register with speed.
What did Hempstead say? Looking back at the printout tape. Analyze course and reaction data related to mass changes. If he... That could be garbage, Timberlake snapped.
Still that gradual speed increase, Flattery said. A slow increment for about 4 minutes now. The ship is programmed for emergencies, Prudence thought. That's what they said. But which are emergencies from that program, and which are emergencies from an unknown source? Flattery took a computer readout. In the past minute and 8 seconds, our speed has gone up 0.011002 against the fixed reference. Bickel began shifting plugs on his computer board. His fingers danced over the keys. He checked the telltales, looked to the visual readout screen.
Mass interference, he said.
Timberlake coughed.
Is that thing saying our speed has raised our mass to a point where something is colliding with us?
We don't know, Bickel said.
And with that computer, the answer could be garbage, Timberlake said.
But the problem isn't garbage, Flattery said. I'm getting direct reports.
Speed and mass are our major variables, Bickel said. Mass reference is cockeyed. Something outside their rated spectrum is colliding with our sensors. That'd throw the...
Prepare for retro firing, Flattery said.
Wouldn't it be wiser to turn ship?
Timberlake asked. He kicked the manual cocoon switch and the action couch snapped securely around him.
Raj is right, Bickel said. Use minimum change. Something's happening for which we have no experience.
I'm starting retro with micro-emission, Flattery said. Prue, monitor and track graph. Tim, watch our mass reference. I'm recording for later analysis.
If there is a later, Timberlake muttered.
Flattery ignored him. John, monitor hull temperature and Doppler comparison.
Right.
Bickel cleared his throat, thinking how crude was this quartered division of functions when compared with a properly working ship control robo-brain. The umbilicus crew was a pack of limping cripples by comparison, and in a situation where they needed to run and dodge and balance with the ability of an athlete. Starting retro, Flattery said. He moved the microcontrols 1 notch. Action couches made a slight adjustment to the change. It registered as a creeping movement of their repeater consoles against the conduits, pipes, and instruments of the fixed walls. "Track graph report," Flattery said. "Speed is dropping unevenly," Prudence answered. "Fits and jerks." Bickel, watching the edge of his repeater where it aligned with the edge of a wall plate, could see the bucking movement of the ship as a series of tiny jerks. His hands on the console keys sensed a tremor in the ship. "Tell me when the graph levels off," Flattery said. "Mass reference report." "Uneven," Timberlake said. "Graph average is dropping, but the direct register is going up and down. It's .008, .0095, .0069. "Let me know if it levels," Flattery said. Without being asked, Bickel said, "There's a micro increase in temperature along the first quadrant stern. Compensation system is taking care of it adequately. Doppler reference shows an actual speed decrease of .00904 plus." "Mark," Flattery said. "S over C confirms," Prudence said. Flattery advanced the microcontrol another notch, feeling perspiration along his back and neck collecting too fast for his suit to compensate. "Track," he said. "Graph is now dipping below the fixed reference," Prudence said, "still dropping unevenly." "Ion reading," Flattery said. 1/4.280001, Timberlake answered. "Agreement with emission rate is positive. Retro normal." "Rate of downgraph is now even on the track," Prudence said. "Mass reference is level and .000001001 out of agreement," Timberlake said. "Hull temperature?" Flattery asked. "Holding." Bickel allowed himself a deep breath. Changes in hull temperature where they should not occur, changes in their speed without a positive explanation. These were more alarming than a physical breakdown that they could touch with their hands and repair. Flattery heard the sigh and thought, "The tin egg had a close call. But close to what? Does Bickel know? Did he tell us everything he got from the computer? Even so, how could we trust computer information now?" But Flattery recalled another part of Hempstead's possibly garbled message. "Unknown area derived mathematically." What if that were pretty close to Hempstead's actual words? Flattery asked himself. An unknown of some kind derived mathematically. The ship had encountered a mass speed problem. Bickel said, "Raj, drop the speed another 2 points and hold. We'll want regular checks on mass speed variations from here on out." "Complying," Flattery said. "Report in order." He turned to the microcontrols, dropped them 2 more notches. "Track graph declines on an even slope," Prudence said. "Mass reference agrees," Timberlake said. "Ion emission normal." "Temperature holding normal," Bickel reported. "Doppler comparison is +0." Bickel looked at those 2 thin black needles on the Doppler comparator. They were what put the bite in this emergency. They provided positive checks on speed through Doppler reference to fixed astronomical bodies. The Doppler comparison and change in speed had agreed. The Doppler comparison and change in speed had agreed 1 for 1. Bickel felt he knew only one area of probability to explain what had happened, but the area involved a kind of theory that had always been treated as a kind of mathematical game. You first had to assume the universe contained 2 groups of matter, each moving faster than the speed of light in relation to the other. Then the Cavendish extrapolation on gravitational theory produced negative transformations. Wide holes were opened in the Newtonian theory that 2 bodies always attract each other with a force proportional to the square of the distance between them. It was that word always, and the implication that all matter exerted gravitational attraction, Bickel thought. "I do not understand what happened," Flattery said, "but I have the distinct feeling we were close to the brink." "The brink of what?" Prudence demanded. Fear was plain in her voice.
We were close to running wild out of the solar system, Bickel said. Out of control, unable to maneuver. Quite likely we were close to being hurtled into another dimension.
Without a prayer of escape, Timberlake said.
The negative transformations in graph theory, Prudence whispered.
What? Timberlake barked.
The implicit energy exchange for enormous mass shifts near the speed of light. Prudence answered him. The negative forms in the equations don't all cancel out until you build hypothetical transformations beyond the speed of light. There is a region of mass-speed change wherein two bodies theoretically repel each other rather than attract. Now, Bickel said, how do we tell Hempstead and his boys about this without blowing the whole show?
We've already blown the whole show, Timberlake growled. The computer
isn't necessarily wrecked, Bickel said. Our life systems still work. Ship servos and sensors appear to be in order. I get consistent replies to demands for information.
Consistent doesn't mean correct, Timberlake said.
Was Hempstead telling us to cease and desist? Flattery asked. If he was, we don't know, Bickel said. As long as we don't know, we don't have to obey.
Or disobey, Flattery thought. How is it the computer seems to function on information demand, but not for AAT translation?
That could mean only one band to debug, Prudence said. If it does...
She broke off, staring at Bickel. Bickel had his eyes closed. Oh, sorry. Perspiration beaded his forehead. The circuitry was as clear in his mind as though projected there from outside himself. He had never completely disconnected the aux from the AAT system which they had used for the aux's interpretive routines. An empty sensation expanded through his chest as he realized every signal from outside into the AAT had gone through the aux into the computer, there to be lost, there to mix up the AAT translator loops.
You didn't disconnect the plug board from the aux, Timberlake whispered. But my computer readout comes through my AAT board, Bickel said. He could hear the desperation in his own voice. Every program demand I put on the computer went through those same aux circuits. You were using subroutines with known addresses, Prudence pointed out.
And everything you asked for has been scattered through the entire system and lost, Timberlake said.
Has it?
Bickel asked. He opened his eyes. There was only one logical way to be certain, of course. It would not do any more damage than already had been done, if there was damage.
We didn't think of Bickel cutting us off from UMB this way, Flattery thought, destroying the translator loops.
Without the translator system to decode the multi-repetitive laser burst messages, the umbilicus crew might just as well use hand signals for its messages to and from Moonbase. Bickel could build a radio transmitter, of course. It would take only a few watts to punch a message across these distances, but no preparations had been made at UMB for such a communications method, and the number of eavesdroppers would be enormous. Carefully, because he had to be certain the first time, Bickel switched 5 patches in his AAT board, triple-checked them. "What are you doing?" Timberlake demanded.
"Be quiet," Prudence ordered, as she recognized what Bickel intended.
"But he's already—"
"A diagnostic routine," Bickel said. "We'll use a simulsynchronous B-register search with a repeat on our original test of the aux circuitry. If harm has already been done, this will just go right through the same channels. It can't do any more harm."
"And the B-register search could tell us where our data went," Timberlake said. "Yeah." "Are you sure?" Flattery asked.
"The technique is right," Prudence said.
Working quietly, triple-checking, Bickel patched together the necessary program. He took a deep breath, sent the first elements of the diagnostic routine through the inputs, setting the balance of the test for offline operation. He had to keep a constant check on this, key each step himself. Presently, he began to get DDA output. He put it on conditional transfer with printout at each step in the control sequence. He felt breathing at his shoulder, looked up to see that Prudence had abandoned her action couch, knelt beside him to stare at the readout. "The data has been shifted, not lost," she whispered. "That's how it looks," Bickel said. "It might as well be lost," Timberlake barked. "No," Timberlake refuted him. "The computer's fully operative as long as we route everything through the aux." "Why didn't the AAT work?" Timberlake demanded. "Come off that, Tim," Bickel said. "You helped me build that test setup." "The incoming messages were going through the AAT circuits twice," Timberlake said. "Sure." "The bits canceled themselves out all along the line," Bickel said. "We probably didn't get a fifth of the message." "It did seem short," Prudence said. "That message is the only thing we've really lost," Bickel said. "I'll ask for a repeat on—" "Wait," Flattery said. "Yes?" Bickel looked at him. What do you tell the UMB—" Oh, jeez. One sec. "Yes?" Bickel looked at him. "What do you tell UMB happened to the original message?" Flattery asked. He glanced away from the big board, met Bickel's gaze. "And what if they were telling us to cease and desist?" "You know something?" Timberlake said. "The beginning and end of Hempstead's message didn't seem to be gobbled at all." "Standard call and sign-off," Bickel said. "They could be recognized and translated from the smallest fractional bits." You know what I find kind of funny? Is the way the aux or the way the aux and AAT interfacing thing is occurring. They're basically describing certain aspects of a large language model at this point. At least my understanding thereof, which admittedly is not what I would call extensive by any stretch of the imagination. I know there's a lot I don't know. I am not involved in programming them, and if I were, I wouldn't admit it. So you'll never really know. Uh, "But the message load was lightest at the beginning," Timberlake said, "and that could be part of the explanation there. You'd get minimum cancellation. We might be able to salvage more of the message, especially in the first parts before the load jammed it up." This is exceedingly cautious for Timberlake, Flattery thought. Is he coming around to Bickel's viewpoint? Bickel found himself moving hesitantly, not knowing why, but unable to escape the logic in Timberlake's argument. He slid out the message print, shuttled it to the replay track. If only the print had been the first step in the reception instead of intermediate, he thought. He removed his feedback patches, sent the print directly into the aux and then into AAT, routed the readout through the operational character print system and into the screen above them. Hempstead's original call appeared there, and they all looked up at it. That had to be accurate, Bickel thought. There came that original long delay, then "Choose by lot from the colonists in hibernation a suitable brain to replace your organic mental core, period. Medical personnel are directed to take a human brain, install it, as temporary organic mental core, and return ship to bidgy, sometimes with the hit it, period, on the question of defining consciousness, you have this data several several times in your computer, comma, and you can refer there, period. Reference is made to data item N in 0 for nerve barrier and threshold data item your computer, period. Best dive yet, period. New organic mental core, period. Medical personnel are directed to abandon all such repeats in their waste of order, period. Bickel broke the sequence. Do you want any more of it? It's getting increasingly unreliable, Flattery said. I see no need.
Those callous, dirty sons of bitches, Timberlake snarled.
Chapter 17. Remember that I am thy creature. I ought to be thy Adam, but I am rather the fallen angel, whom thou drivest from joy for no misdeed. Like Adam, I was apparently united by no link to any other being in existence. Satan had his companions, fellow devils to admire and encourage him, but I am solitary and abhorred. Frankenstein's monster speaks. For a long time after Timberlake's outburst, they sat silently in the cocooned isolation of their action couches, absorbing their predicament. Only Flattery at the big board appeared animate. It was his couch which creaked with his movements. It was his couch which creaked with his movements. It was his couch which creaked with his movements. It was his couch which creaked with his movements. I'm not quite sure what the emphasis should be there. Because they don't mention creaking couches. Anyway, sorry. It was his couch which creaked with his movements. Switches clicked as he depressed them. The underlying stink of their enclosed quarters, by introspection, lifted across their awareness thresholds. Take the brain from a colonist? Prudence thought. Had Hempstead really told them to commit such an atrocity? She believed it. Bickel appeared almost asleep, but his hands clenched and unclenched. Prudence looked at Timberlake, seeing how dark his face was, the way he instinctively bared his teeth. Those fools back at UMB, she thought. Didn't they realize they'd be stamping on the rawest inhibition of our life systems engineer? Kill a helpless colonist in the Hybe tanks. No, she thought, what UMB asked was worse than killing. Flattery, noting the effect of the message on Timberlake, felt the jangle of conscience and personal fear. Where his own niche on the ship was concerned, Flattery maintained few illusions. He was both Judas goat and sacrificial goat, classic functions of religious extremity. He was giver of life and executioner, and lest he feel godlike in these powers, he was the ultimate victim of whatever would be the earthling's destiny. As a bird that wandereth from her nest, so is a man that wandereth from his place, he quoted to himself. Aloud, he said, what they command, we cannot do that.
You'd better not suggest it, Timberlake said.
Then we'd better assess whatever it is we've built there in the computer shop, and go on from that point, Flattery said. What have we built, John?
Damned if I know, Bickel said.
Well, it doesn't seem to be a consciousness anyway, Prudence said.
God damn it, Bickel snapped. There you go again. Consciousness. Conscious. It isn't flobble gobble. It's what you might as well say. That's what you might as well say. You don't know how to define consciousness. You don't know what it is. But you go around throwing sentences together as though they had meaning and...
I could say the same thing to you, buddy. I could say the same thing to Frank Herbert with some of his technobabble that he's done. I'm reasonably confident there are significant swaths, entire paragraphs of technobabble that don't really mean anything. I might just be dumb. It's possible. Some of them are definite. There's definitely nonsense happening. Sorry.
God damn it!
Bickel snapped. I get to say flobble gobble again, so we're doing the paragraph. Over.
There you go again. Consciousness. Conscious. It isn't flobble gobble. That's what you might as well say. You don't know how to define consciousness. You don't know what it is. But you go around throwing sentences together as though they had meaning, and that's it, Timberlake said. That's what hits me right in the pit of the stomach. We start out to build something, and we don't know what it is we're building.
It's time to hit them with it, Flattery thought. You're wrong, Tim, Flattery said, and so are you, John. Prudence knows what consciousness is. Prudence does know what consciousness is, just as you do. She's a human being. Humans are the only creatures within our ken who can possibly know what consciousness is. Computers can't do that job. Humans must.
Then let her define it,
Bickel said. Maybe she can't, Flattery said, but she possesses it. A while back you were saying we might not have to define it, Prudence said, and she stared accusingly at Bickel.
It's just damn poor engineering, Bickel said. Copy the original and hope you get the same results. We can't be sure we're copying everything in the human model. What are we leaving out?
He's frustrated and striking out, she thought. Now's the time to push, while Raj has him set up for me. Okay, engineer, where do you think you're going with your field theory idea? Bickel stared at her, realizing abruptly that she was deliberately pushing him.
All right, I'll play her game, he thought. Am I supposed to be angry? No, that'd be too easy. The best attack comes from an unexpected quarter. Stretch yourself a bit, Prue, and try to follow what I'm saying, he challenged her. The field theory approach deals with three forces. First, you have the source of experience, the universe which inflicts itself upon us.
That has to be deeply involved with the way your nervous system functions, she said. Don't try to teach me my specialty.
I wouldn't think of it. And you're right. That's the second element. There has to be someone who experiences that universe.
And third?
Third, you have a really tricky one. This is the relationship between that someone and all of this neural raw material which we call experience. This relationship, this third-order phenomenon, that's our field.
The self, she said.
A field,
Bickel countered. She shrugged. Huxley's spatio-temporal cage, with its confused swarm of ideas.
Yeah, Huxley said the conscious self had to derive from memory, but he was just playing with words because he was frightened by what lay beyond the words.
And you're not? Flattery demanded.
You'd better listen closer, Bickel said. When you try to say that a conscious self derives only from our memory to That's right. Throw like 3 multisyllabic words in a row at Frag. He won't know what to do with them. Ha! Got him! You'd better listen closer, Bickel said. When you try to say that a conscious self derives only from our memory function, you're identifying the someone who experiences with that.
Huh? I got lost. When you try to say that a conscious self derives only from our memory function, you're identifying the someone who experiences with that which supplies the experience. Okay, yes. I've got it.
When you try to say that a conscious self derives only from our memory function, you're identifying the someone who experiences with that which supplies the experience.
Memory is experience, Prudence agreed.
We have to focus on this third-order relationship, she said.
The total field that's greater than the sum of its parts, she said.
She's ready for her shock, Bickel thought. For that matter, so's Raj. You self-satisfied medicos give me a pain. You say only humans are conscious. From Raj, that's sacrilege. From you, Prue, that's stupidity. You see one corner of the spectrum and immediately say you know what the whole universe of light is like. Never once has either one of you asked, am I really conscious?
Flattery felt an unexplainable pain across his chest. The console in front of him blurred for a heartbeat. Then he had himself under control. Back at UMB, they laughed and quoted Edgar Allan Poe, Flattery thought. They had said individual humans might not have Poe's organ of analysis, but that a whole society could create such an organ out of one of its members. Had they realized what a dangerous monster they were creating? What could you hide from Bickel if he turned his attention to it? That was what Prue meant, of course, when she cautioned against underestimating Bickel. But had the UMB manipulators known what a night they had loosed among the pawns? Perhaps they realized, at least unconsciously, when they set me to watch over him, Flattery thought.
You try to resolve the basic question into smaller and smaller parts, Bickel said. Smaller and smaller labels. But that's just avoiding the issue.
Are we conscious? Prudence whispered, rolling the thought over and over in her mind. And she thought of her experience with the marijuana derivative, THC, tetrahydrocannabinol. She sought an anti-ataraxic, a selective stimulator of consciousness, something to hold the darkness at bay in a very special manner. But the instant she'd neared the stimulation experience, darkness had spilled over all the edges of her awareness. Adrenochrome, she thought. It was a sudden and explosive thought, as of something that had crouched in her path and leaped out at her. Adrenochrome, nitrogen to CH3. If she inverted it and gave it a common CH3, bond with some of the THC forms, that was very like some of the deadly ones, but in an extremely small dosage. Would it get through the blood-brain barrier? And adrenochrome was one of the hallucinogens. What of that?
You get your fingernails over the ledge, Bickel was saying, and you haven't yet raised your eyes to the lip. You can only see the dim reflection of light, but you lie and tell those around and below you that you can see to the horizon.
As though his words unlocked a door, the memory of a dream flooded through Prudence. She had dreamed it, sometime during a long sleep, sometime when... In Hybe. She had dreamed it in the hibernation tank. In the dream there had been others around her, but she had been rejected by them. The others built a low wall and taunted her to climb it. But each time she tried, the others raised the wall higher, higher and higher, until she no longer even attempted it. Finally, the others had ignored her, but she had heard them laughing and talking on the other side of the wall. Remembering that dream, Prudence looked at Bickel and understood the thing he had probably seen from the beginning. The problem of creating an artificial consciousness was the problem of consciousness itself. It was an enormous structure, like a tall cliff, or a wall, that they must climb. It loomed over them, dour and black, with only the taunting hint of light at the top. "You did that deliberately to make me feel small," she accused.
"Welcome to the club," Bickel said. "What are you saying?" Timberlake demanded. "Are you trying to say that even if we build an analog of a human, we still might not achieve this consciousness?" "Let's take another look at what happened to the ship Brains," Bickel said. What's the basic command they were supposed to obey?" "Remain conscious and alert at all times," Timberlake said. "But hell, if you're saying they succumbed to fatigue, that's nonsense. They were buffered against all—" "Not fatigue," Bickel said. "I'm just wondering, what if they took that order literally? That order to remain conscious?"
"The degree of consciousness," Prudence mused. "Threshold," Flattery said, and there was wonder in his voice. "Yes," Prudence said, "a hyperconscious subject has a low threshold. Impulses pass into his awareness with ease. You're suggesting the OMC brains couldn't handle hyperconsciousness."
"Something like that."
"Look," she said, "the assault of nerve impulses on the human consciousness." She looked defensively at Bickel. "Well, What else are we going to call it?
Okay, Bickel said. Go on.
She stared at him a moment. This assault is constant, gigantic. The impulses are always present. They swarm around you. There has to be a limiting factor, a threshold. Impulses have to pass a certain threshold before you grow aware of them. And that threshold varies from person to person, even minute to minute in the same person, Flattery said.
But how do nerve impulses get over that wall? Bickel asked.
Why did he use that word? She wondered. Sometimes the impulses grow stronger, Flattery said. But that isn't the whole story, Prudence said. There's activity on the side of the experiencer, too. You focus your attention on something, and that lowers your threshold. Danger can lower it, too, Flattery said, and he waited to see if Bickel would pick up that cue.
Bickel looked at Flattery, wondering. We're in danger right now, Raj. Is that something they did to us? Deliberately?
You think that danger out there isn't real? Flattery asked, unconsciously hooking a thumb toward the shortest distance between himself and the outer hull. Bickel held his silence, feeling his tongue grow dry. Unreasoning terror pervaded him. It was a towering oblivion that threatened to engulf him. John, Prudence asked, are you all right?
Just a touch of ship vertigo,
Bickel managed.
He forced a smile. Perhaps, maybe I'm tired. I went more than 2 shifts at that haywire setup in the shop, and I haven't really had a good rest for I don't know how long.
Knowing when to relax the pressure is half the job, Prudence reminded herself. Get some chow and shut-eye. It might help if we let up on this problem a bit. And she thought, I can give him that advice, but I won't take it myself. Those last chemical experiments on her own body were playing hob with her sense of reality. Yes, it was sense of reality. Yes, yes! Those last chemical experiments on her own body were playing hob with her sense of reality. She wondered if she should take Raj into her confidence, but rejected this thought as soon as it occurred. Raj would say that she was meddling. He'd force her to stop, and she felt that she didn't dare stop now. There was something so close.
What about answering Hempstead?
Bickel asked.
Let 'em sweat,
Timberlake growled.
They'll figure it was a transmission breakdown if we go too long beyond the delay period,
Bickel said.
They'll retransmit the message.
That gets us the retransmission without committing ourselves, Flattery said.
Isn't that a rather devious suggestion for our cleric?
Bickel asked. That was the psychiatrist speaking, Prudence said. Go on, get your sleep.
And I can sit here and twiddle my thumbs, Timberlake said.
Bickel looked at Timberlake, recalling the man's bitter anger over Hempstead's suggestion. For the first time in many hours, Bickel focused his full attention on Timberlake, seeing the pride the man had swallowed in relinquishing the command of the ship, seeing Timberlake's primary concern for the human lives around him. There was no easing Timberlake's tensions right now, Bickel realized. The lives were in danger. Every life on the tin egg, from the lowliest chick embryo in the hive tanks right up to Timberlake himself. Timberlake sometimes saw through things intuitively, Bickel realized, and Timberlake was an engineer. It might help him if he were kept occupied, and this crew could use any available edge.
Tim, Bickel said, we have to solve for consciousness the way you solve for a specific effect in a transceiver or a tuner or an amplifier. You might be chewing that over while I get some rest. I need specific answers that can be translated into working schematics.
But we're stuck with that thing in the shop, Timberlake protested.
Only as a beginning. We have to use the aux, yeah, because it's our only entrance into the computer for some of our vital data. Now, but it's still a place to begin. Nothing's changed, really.
Except we're 2 days closer to our deadline and no closer to a solution, Timberlake growled. Bickel put down a surge of anger. Suit yourself. He turned away, crossed to the hatch, into quarters, let himself through, sealed the hatch behind him. The sound of the hatch expanders hissed through him like a sigh, and he found himself standing in the galley. What? Oh, okay, that's just weird. It's a page break. The sound of the hatch expanders hissed through him like a sigh, and he found himself standing in the galley round, wondering if he had enough energy left to eat and get into a sleeping cubicle. I have to eat, he whispered. Gotta keep my strength up. He pushed himself across to the quick bar, sent half a heat charge through a squeeze tube of soup, gulped it. Chicken. He could feel the broth pouring energy back into him, took a tube of hot chocolate after the soup. He crossed to his padded tank, checked the cubicle's life systems repeaters. Every gauge was normal. He let himself into the tank, closed its hatch, pulled the pneumopin. Slowly, gently, the tank enclosed him, buoyed him. He felt the flow of oxygen-rich air across his face, the air filtered and refiltered so many times that it had lost most of its ship stink. His muscles began to unwind, and, as usual when he prepared for sleep in the cubicle, he wondered at the soothing effect. It was like a return to the womb. What womb bore the original me? He wondered. Somewhere there was a mother and a father. Even if I was grown in a gestation chamber, somewhere flesh and blood conceived me. Who were they? I'll never know. Useless even to think about it. He forced his attention instead onto the cube around him, the artificial womb with its deep sense of security to ensure sound sleep. Why don't we get more and better rest in a cube? A quick nap on an action couch is nowhere near as restful. Why? Is it something atavistic? A phylogenetic return to the sea? Or is it something else, something we have yet to recognize? Bickel focused his awareness on the billowing softness of the enclosure, the rich, moist air. Sleep was sending its tendrils through him, and he sensed how slow and even his breathing had become. How rhythmic. The set rhythms, he thought, holding back sleep. There's an oscillation factor in our problem. Oscillation is present in hypnotic captivation, in sleep breathing, in the heartbeat, in sex. And living cells possess north and south magnetic poles, he thought. He recalled the biologist designer, Vincent Frame, expounding on that theme in a lecture for biological engineering back at UMB. I am a structure composed of many different cells, Bickel reminded himself. Coordinated. Frame had hammered at this theme, pointing to vital clues in the oscillations and pulses of human activities. Cell energies. In that remembered lecture, Frame had been explaining the design of a low-gravity lounge chair. Rhythms, characteristic rhythms of living. Frame had returned to that concept time and again. Oscillation. Despite his fatigue and the sleep lurking at the edge of his awareness, Bickel felt the urgency of this hot track onto which his mind had stumbled. He thumbed his intercom alive, looked up to the tiny monitor screen. Timberlake's face peered back at him. Remember Dr. Frame's lectures. Oscillation. Discuss it later. Bickel released the intercom switch before Timberlake could answer. As he sank back, Bickel felt sleep come up from some dark place underneath to engulf him. Chapter 18. Is consciousness merely a special form of hallucination? Prudence Lawn Wagand, Number 5. Message capsule fragment. Flattery had just shifted the comm central board to Prudence. He looked across at Timberlake, who sat on the edge of his action couch, staring at a memo pad of ship paper. The thin paper rustled faintly as Timberlake folded back a page, scribbled something on a clean surface. The monitor screen beside Timberlake showed that Bickel had sunk into sleep almost immediately after that strange call. "Tim, did Bick's message make sense to you?" Flattery asked. "Maybe." Timberlake looked up from his notepad. "Let's assume that consciousness involves an organic receptor of some kind which produces a field structure." "And this field structure expands and collapses under different stresses," Prudence said. Timberlake nodded. "And that field structure itself would be the phenomenon we call consciousness." "Are you two agreeing with him?" Flattery asked. "For the moment," Timberlake said. Now let's follow this assumption. The organic receptor would be subjected to a constant storm of impressions." "And most researchers think the cerebellum is the focus of that storm of impressions," Prudence said. "But it's certainly not the seat of consciousness," Flattery objected. "There may be no seat of consciousness," Prudence said. "We're talking about a motile phenomenon. It can move by itself."
"Okay," Timberlake said. What's the impression input? What does the cerebellum receive?"
"Electrical inputs of some form," Prudence said.
"Yes, but how is that input sorted into its receiver?"
Flattery inhaled a deep breath, caught at last by the feeling of the hunt with the quarry near. Was it possible that this crew would succeed? He grew conscious that Prudence had asked him a question. "What? Do you understand this concept? We are talking about electroform inputs of nerve impulse groups, and each group would be of extremely short duration." "But the groups wouldn't be absolutely discrete," Flattery said. Wouldn't be absolutely discrete," Flattery said. "Of course not," she said. "It's like the ambiguity of light. Sometimes the physicist has to think of light as waves and sometimes as particles." "Wavicles," Flattery said, his tone musing. "Right. So sometimes we think of these nerve impulse groups as discrete units, particles, and sometimes we think of them as continuous flow, waves."
"Track that discrete flow for me," Timberlake said.
She glanced away from the big console, studied Timberlake. There was no avoiding the excitement in him. With that intuitive sense of his, Timberlake had leaped ahead somewhere and the others were supposed to follow. "The track's pretty well plotted," Flattery said. "Action currents are conducted over the cortico-pontocerebellar tract. What are you driving at?" Oh God, here we go. She saw it then as a diagram in her mind. 1. Cortico, 2. Ponto, 3. Cerebellar. 3 phase. Were those the essential 3 of Bickel's field self? Prudence put this thought into words, waited, not knowing quite what to expect from the others. 3 tracks, not 1, Flattery mused. No, that's not it. Then, pouncing, holographic! "A holographic field," Prudence said. She saw that Flattery, too, had been caught up in Timberlake's excitement. But the board demanded her full attention for a moment, and it was only later that she realized she had missed some silent exchange between Flattery and Timberlake. Perhaps a knowing look, a nod. Presently Timberlake said,
"I want you to say it. What's the terminal point of all that input?"
"It goes into the silent or non-functional areas of the cerebellum," Prudence said. Flattery felt a need to expand on this. "That's the superior and inferior lobes, the declive, the folium, the tuber, the major portion of the cerebellum." "Mediation is across the tract from the cerebral cortex," Prudence said.
"Silent or non-functional?" Timberlake asked. "Don't you medical people ever listen to your own words?"
"What do you mean?" Flattery asked. There was an edge of anger in his tone.
"What's the potential, the effect?"
Timberlake demanded. I don't. Energy arrives. Does it turn a wheel? Does it turn on a light? You can't keep piling energy into any system indefinitely without some kind of output or balancing effect. But you said, what's the output, the potential, the balancing effect? The energy goes in. What does it do? Are you suggesting that this potential, that it's consciousness? Prudence asked, and she remembered Bickel calling the field system an infinite sponge. Flattery cut across this thought. Didn't Bickel say something about consciousness being like the vestibular reflex of the inner ear? Oh, sorry, that was Flattery. Flattery cut across this thought. Didn't Bickel say something about the consciousness being like the vestibular reflex of the inner ear? The way we balance, Timberlake said. The thing that tells us which way is down and which way is up. The strangest thing, Prudence said. I feel as though I'd been a little bit asleep all along, not awake enough to realize what Bickel was driving at. But now you're beginning to get it, Timberlake said. That storm of sense impressions doesn't stop when you're asleep, Flattery argued. Are you trying to tell me that sleep is a form of consciousness? As he spoke, he remembered making the same argument to Bickel, but now he had to be honest with himself and face up to the obvious answer, plus everything that the answer implied. Yes, of course, Flattery said. Sleep's a form of consciousness. It just falls near one end of the spectrum. And all that unexplained energy? Timberlake insisted. It has to be used for something, Flattery said. Yes, I see that. All right, Timberlake said. The consciousness effect, field or whatever, may mediate the energy balance. Perhaps it's a homeostat. All biological control All biological control mechanisms are homeostats, Prudence said. So what? It's not enough to say that consciousness juggles the storm of sense impressions, Flattery said. That still leaves your question unanswered, Tim. What happens to the energy? There must be another effect somewhere in the system, Timberlake said. There has to be an unexplained flow of energy somewhere, or a flow that's been explained the wrong. Synergy, Prudence said. Flattery shot a surprised glance at her. The word had been on the tip of his tongue. Sorry. Just had to sneeze. Flattery shot a surprised glance at her. The word had been on the tip of his tongue. Synergy, Timberlake mused. Any medical surprises in there? Prudence heard the question within the question. The life systems engineer had a working acquaintance with synergy, but he wanted to know if a medical simplification might help him. Timberlake was sniffing down a hot trail. It's the effect produced by our spinal reflexes, she said. Synergy acts through the cerebellum, an extra effect. It's on the side of the, circuit that leads out from the cortex. We're looking for an integrating or balancing effect, Timberlake said. That's possible, Flattery said. This wasn't enough for Timberlake. Simple synaptic integration is enough on the side leading toward the cortex. Does the synergy involve output from the frontal lobes or the gyrus? Could it account for our missing energy? Why the gyrus? Flattery asked. I keep looking for secondary mediation areas. We don't dare overlook anything. We have to be right the first time or we go down the tube the same way all the other ships did. You're going around in circles the same way Bickel does, Flattery objected. So you narrowed down the mediating area to the frontal lobes. So what? Timberlake wouldn't be distracted. Lots of researchers think the frontal lobes... Fine, Flattery interrupted. No end of good people may have suggested that the frontal lobes are the mysterious center of consciousness, but Prue may be closer to it than you are. Motile, remember. There may be no seat of consciousness. Timberlake blinked. What good does it do to know where it is if you don't know what it is? Flattery pressed him. Synergy may not be totally explained, but it's still useful as a concept. However, if you're suggesting that synergy is consciousness, dead end, Timberlake said. But Bickel thinks we're after a field-regulating sensor which deals with mental and emotional responses. So that's what's bothering him, Prudence thought. She said aloud, if we're going to reproduce this thing artificially, whatever we build has to have sensory, mental, and emotional responses to regulate. Flattery pressed himself back into his couch. We can give Bickel's ox its sensory and mental responses, but how do we give it emotions? What about negative feedback? Timberlake asked. Emotions always involve a goal. Negative feedback suggests a goal-seeking element in the system. Consciousness requires a goal? Flattery asked. He realized by the sudden silence greeting his question that they had lifted themselves to a critical point of this analysis. They could all feel it. Bickel's challenging ideas had goaded them to this effort, and now all of them were poised, sprinters waiting for the gun. A goal, Timberlake whispered. His voice grew louder. An object on which to focus. He looked at Flattery. The field relationship? Close, but not quite it, Prudence thought. Flattery said, not an entity or a thing or an area of the brain, but a connecting link between such things or entities or areas. Out of the corner of an eye, Flattery saw Prudence adjust a dial on the big console. He sensed the waiting tensions in her movements. A bridge! Timberlake shouted. Of course, a bridge! A bridge built out of language? Prudence asked. But the symbols are loaded with errors, with weaknesses and flaws, Timberlake said. That's it. Flattery saw a new quickness and sureness enter Prudence's movements as she digested this. Time spanning, she thought, with words, with symbols. And Flattery thought, there is a gateway to the imagination you must enter before you are conscious, and the keys to the gate are symbols. You can carry ideas through the gate from one time-place to another time-place, but you must carry the ideas in symbols. Do you know, though, what you carry, and who it is that carries? Every symbol has hidden premises behind it, Flattery said. Every word carries unspoken assumptions. And the most critical word in the whole problem is the word consciousness, Timberlake said. Which assumes, Prudence said, that there is a self to be conscious. A bridge comes from one place to another place, Timberlake went on. If it starts breaking down, the engineers get out the original blueprints, the materials orders, and they go to the bridge and examine it. They study the bridge under static conditions and under loads. Then they may replace parts, put in new bracings. Or tear the whole damn thing down and start over, said Prudence. Didn't either one of you hear me? Our word assumes there's a self to be conscious. We heard you, Flattery said, but there are more important hidden assumptions than know thyself. What about know thy limits? Limits. Timberlake picked up the word. At one end, sleep or the sleep of death, and at the other end, waking. And the question of Western religion, Flattery said, is what lies beyond death? But the question of the Zen master is, what lies beyond waking?
For key rice's sake!
The voice was Bickel's, and it plunged down onto them from the command circuit screen overhead. Flattery looked up with a smug smile to find Bickel glaring down at him from the screen.
I leave you for half an hour, and you lure these poor fools down some mystical dead end, tossing labels around just like those jackasses back at UMB. Zen Master. Next you'll trot out cosmic consciousness. Of all the impractical...
John, we've refined this question down to its essence, Timberlake said.
I asked you to give me some circuit suggestions. I've been listening to you play verbal medicine ball for 10 minutes, and what I want to know is this. How will all that yakking build one circuit? Just one circuit!
You yourself asked UMB to define consciousness,
Prudence protested. Because I want to keep them occupied and out of our hair. The screen went blank. Flattery looked over to the console in front of Prudence, saw that the command circuit key pointed to on, but the screen remained blank. That key is open, Flattery told himself. It had to be turned on deliberately. She did it to waken Bickel. But why was the screen blank? As though she read his mind, Prudence said, John's installed an override on the command circuit. Any idea why? Didn't you see where he was? Timberlake demanded. He was in the shop, working in that ox mess. Working on that ox mess. Timberlake unlocked his action couch and, in almost the same motion, launched himself at the hatch to the computer maintenance shop. He wrenched at the lock dogs, but they remained immovable. He's jammed the lock! Timberlake's voice rose in fear. If he wrecks our computer... You noticed, so you may as well watch, taunted Bickel's voice. They looked up to see a view of the shop on their big screen. Bickel stood with the detritus of the initial aux installation around him. Dangling leads, meters, neuron blocks, all stacked precariously away from the computer wall. Bickel, just listen to reason, Timberlake pleaded. You can't just tear into... Shut up or I'll turn you off, Bickel warned. He knelt with a substitute neuron block, inserted it between the aux and the computer wall, began making connections. Please, John, Prudence begged, if you'd... You're not going to stop him by talking to him, Flattery said. Listen to Raj. Bickel slipped another neuron block into place against the wall, made new connections. Rhythm, he said. I went to sleep on it, and it woke me up. That and your yakking. Rhythm. Another substitute neuron block went into place beneath the first two. Describe what you're doing, Flattery said, and he motioned for Timberlake to come to his side. Brain vision anatomy can be reduced to the mathematical description of a scanning process, Bickel answered. It follows that any other brain function, anatomy, including consciousness, should submit to the same approach. I can duplicate an alpha rhythm cycle for a brain scanning sweep by setting it up in the time cycle of these neuron blocks. If I trace each rhythm from a human model and duplicate... What's the function of each of these human rhythms? Flattery demanded. As he spoke, Flattery scribbled a note on a pad of ship flimsy, passed it into Timberlake's hand. Timberlake looked up into the screen, but Bickel still had his back to the video eyes that matched the screen view. We don't know that function for certain, do we? Flattery asked, and he motioned frantically for Timberlake to read the note. Timberlake turned his attention onto the paper, read, Back way, around the hive tanks. Bickel hasn't jammed the hatch from quarters. Take the other tube and surprise him. Again, Timberlake looked up to the screen. The ox was taking on new shape under Bickel's hands, reaching out to the angle of the shop against the computer wall. It began to assume a feeling of topological improbability in Timberlake's eyes, with jutting triangles of plastic, oblongs of neuron couplers, strips of Eng multipliers, and the color-coded leads interweaving like a crazy spider web. Timberlake felt a hand grab his arm, shake him. He looked at the hand, followed its arm to Flattery's glaring face. Flattery gestured to the note in Timberlake's other hand. Again, Timberlake looked at the note, recognizing why he remained rooted to this spot. Around the hob tanks? No, it would have to be through the hob tanks. Flattery must know that. Timberlake turned his tortured gaze on Flattery, bringing the terror up to full awareness. Bickel has infected me with his cynical skepticism. I'm afraid of what I'll find in the hob tanks if I look too close. I'll find the tanks empty and nothing but leads back into the computer from the tanks. And the computer will be programmed to simulate the presence of hibernating life in those tanks. The whole thing will turn out to be a monstrous hoax. I'll discover I've been life systems engineer to nothing. Why do I fear that? He wondered.
Even this thought set him shivering. Again, Flattery shook his arm. Why doesn't he go? Timberlake wondered. He's so anxious. The answer was obvious. Flattery wasn't as knowledgeable about computers. He couldn't analyze what Bickel was doing and repair, if that was possible, the damage. I'm panic-stricken, Timberlake thought. But he knew he couldn't stay rooted here. He had to take that other passage. And when he got into the hive tanks, he wouldn't be able to resist the close inspection. He'd look beyond the dials and gauges and repeaters. He'd look into the tanks. Despite his unexplainable terror, the other possibility remained, that the tanks still contained life, and this life shared their danger. Sorry, I didn't realize I'd muted myself. That's where we will call it for this week. Um, yeah, that'll make it a pretty even 3 batches, I think, to the end. Pretty handily, I think. I reckon. I reckoneth. So yeah, hopefully people are enjoying. I realize I'm having a rough time with some of the more techno-babbly portions, if they are indeed techno-babble. What I do understand of what they're saying is indeed jives pretty well with some of my understanding of at least how consciousness works, not necessarily the brain anatomy portions of where consciousness is supposed to happen. I can't remember what the latest on that is. Suffice it to say, uh, this would have actually been a pretty good piece to do in conjunction with Blindsight, if anything. So if you haven't listened to that, or read that rather, you can go on to Peter Watts' website actually and read it for free. I'd kind of recommend that. Echopraxia, last I checked, is not yet free under a Creative Commons license. Let me check now to see. Oh, I cannot get to his website. That's interesting. Let me try the blog portion. Huh. Hmm. I haven't checked his website in a month or two. Maybe my internet just died? That'd be awkward. Let me see if the Great Evil, Peter Watts. Maybe because I'm doing the no. Huh. I cannot get onto rifters.com at all. I'll have to try it with a proxy. I've got a proxy I can use. Got numerous proxies, actually. Many such creatures. Yes, indeed. Sorry, this is turning into a field trip. Interesting. If I run it through a proxy, it works. That's bad. I know what could be causing that on my end. That's something dumb I did. Oh, he does have a new blog post at least. That's cute. Oh, let's go. This looks like it's probably a snippet from his upcoming third uh, Blindopraxia novel. Firefall, I think the name of the duology is. That's what I've seen it packaged as. Let me check to see, however, if indeed... Yeah, no, I know it's causing that. Aggravatingly, I know it's causing that. That is my router, I think, being overly aggressive. Come on. Fortunately, the proxy slows things way down. Here we go. Backlist. Backlist. Nope, no echopraxia just yet. Hopefully sometime soon. I don't know how long it was before Blindsight was made, got the Creative Commons freebie treatment. So it could be a while. He probably has contractual demands. Anyway, I'm gonna dip. Thanks to everybody who tuned in. If you did not tune in and are wondering why this is so rough, that's simple. It's because I do these live every Monday, Wednesday, and Friday. Unless otherwise detained. Starting at 12 noon Eastern time, or US East Coast time, or UTC -5. You can catch me doing streams Mondays, Wednesdays, and Fridays. Otherwise, it's all on the YouTube channel, and I update the playlists every month. Usually, he says. Usually at the end of each month / start of each next month. So we have some backlog at the moment that I've got to get reorganized in the next couple weeks, but it's not too bad yet. For current placement in the time stream continuum, we're looking at, so the next 3 weeks we'll be banging through the rest of Destination Void by Frank Herbert on Fridays. On Mondays we'll get through most of Armor by John Stakely, which is kind of like Starship Troopers if it was more cynical and, had an actual plot. And on Wednesdays, actually next Wednesday might be the last one. Yeah, next Wednesday will be the last installment of Beowulf, a new translation by Maria Davana Headley, which will include the final portion of the epic tale of Beowulf, as well as the introduction by Maria Davana Headley, which is where she explains her reasoning and logic behind some of the choices she made, other than just for funsies, which is absolutely part of it. I know it has been regarded as a contentious translation. I know there's a bunch of purists that are quite upset, and I know my favorites are probably either the Heaney translation or the Tolkien translation that I've got. They were good enough for me to snag copies of. But this one, upon rereading it in particular, I've really fallen in love. I think it's an enjoyable take. I don't feel that it is losing much impact. It's a different impact. I don't feel like it's being mangled out of shape. I think in the spirit that it's going for, it makes contextual sense. Anyway, with that, I'm going to leave you here until next Monday. And yeah, hopefully people enjoyed. Feel free to tell me all the horrible things I'm doing wrong in the comments if you so choose. If you don't so choose, then don't. I'm not going to tell you to like and subscribe. There's not much point of that. Okay, saying I don't believe in the algorithm is not true. I do not feel beholden to the algorithm. I do not wish to be like, oh, you gotta get me noticed, guys, so I can make the monies off of the views and the ads. No, we're not doing that. We're not playing that game. I don't need this for money. This I'm doing as a fun hobby, which is partly why it's so low quality. In truth, is because I'm unwilling to make something terribly, terribly involved. But I am actually thinking of getting some hardware improvements that might at least improve audio quality somewhat, but that won't be until probably next year. Um, Not that the price per se is an issue. It's kind of like I want to delineate things a little better rather than be like in the middle of a book and then suddenly audio quality improves. I'd kind of like to be a bit more of a tying of the knot sort of thing. I don't know why I just made a slurping noise for making the knot. Knots don't slurp. Maybe if it's a very wet knot, made of a noodle, perhaps. Huh. String theory. Anyway, I'm gonna go. Thanks again. Stay safe, stay sane, and be decent to each other. And even if you do have all the answers and you're a problem solver like Bickel, you don't have to be an asshole like Bickel. Bickel's kind of a jerk ass. He's really not very pleasant. He's extremely acerbic. I am using that word correctly? Yes, I am using that word correctly, he told himself, hoping against hope. Anyway, thanks again. If anyone is understanding more of this book than I am, or thinks they understand more of this book than I am, please don't hesitate to explain some of the technobabble. I would not mind. Because, frankly, I'm kind of lost. I think most of it's technobabble. Not all of it is, but a bunch of it is. But it's fun. You can definitely feel, though, that it's it was, and next week I'll try to remember to use the, it was serialized in, I want to say, Galaxy magazine. I want to say it was Galaxy magazine. Yes, Galaxy magazine, as Do I Wake or Dream. And it started off as like a short story, and then he expanded it out, and beefed it up a bit, and also got rid of some things and changed some stuff around, apparently. I have to actually, I don't think I've ever actually read the original version. I should get around to that. I believe I have a digital copy of that issue of Galaxy in my archive somewhere. That's the August 65. I almost certainly have that. If not, Project Gutenberg might have it, or the Internet Archive. It's not piracy if it's no longer in publication, right? Anyway, so yeah, with that, well, Project Gutenberg stuff is all fair use anyway, because the licenses have lapsed. Yeah, with that, I'm going to go. Thanks again, and see you all later. Toodles.